Thank you.
Thank you, JV. Good evening, everyone. Well, you know, I put this presentation together after many years and many clients and many presentations. I said, you know what, there are a lot of questions that people have about job search and a lot of mistakes that people make very unknowingly, right, unwittingly. Because look, you might be an expert in your job, but that does not make you an expert in job search, right? And so we're here to help you with that. And here are some of my top 10, right? Now I could probably go on to about 25, but I want to start out with one that I thought was really interesting, and here it is. Mistake number one, a LinkedIn and resume brand that's too broad. What in the world do I mean by that? So I wanted to start by saying that, you know, the biggest conundrum that I see in the job search world is this disparity, right, between where a job seeker is coming from and where the organization is coming from. So the job seeker, all of you, are looking to fulfill your career passion. The organization, on the other hand, is looking to solve their business pain, period. That's why they're hiring you. Not about you. It's about them, and it's about the problems that they want to solve. If you had a leaky faucet and you call the general handyman, right, that person's probably going to be a little less qualified to help you than the plumber, right? The plumber who specializes in it. You're going to probably go for the expert. You're going to go for the person who's going to really help solve your, in this case, your home pain. And that leads me to this idea of a brand. Your brand is your statement of value to solve an employer's business pain. Now, hopefully, your desire to solve their pain intersects with your career passion. That's where all the beauty happens. And so what I've found is that a lot of folks, when they're trying to craft their brand, end up becoming way too broad to the point where I've actually seen LinkedIn headlines that say something like, you know, independent professional, or, you know, creative superstar, you know, who does XYZ, without getting very focused on what it is that they do. And so what I've heard from job seekers and my clients, and just so you know, I'm both a recruiter and I'm a career coach. Okay, so I sit on both sides of the hiring aisle. And when I talk to my coaching clients, they'll say to me things like, well, Shira, they'll say, I don't want to screen myself out of any opportunities. You heard that one? Have you ever said that to yourself, right? I want to be broad enough because, oh, I could miss out on something. The reality is that people, including you and me, right, when we hire a vendor, people like to hire specialists and not generalists, the plumber versus the general handyman. Now, you might say, well, if that is, you know, if that's the situation, then how do I not screen myself out? Well, I have a little concept for you, and I call it having a broadly narrow brand. What? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it actually does. A broadly narrow brand. So it's narrow in that it has definition, right? It's kind of like your largest common denominator over your search. That could be what I call your lane, your profession, what you do. It could be your industry or the sector that you serve. So I'll give you an example in my role. Now, I happen to be self-employed, but in my recruiter role, I almost exclusively focus on associations. So associations are my clients, and I do others as well, but 98% are associations. So I would call myself an association recruiter or an association search consultant. That's broadly narrow. How? Because I don't specifically say I only work for trade associations or professional societies or agriculture associations or medical societies. I do all of them. I work for associations, but within there, there's elasticity. Okay, so there's a little flexibility in your branding. So it's really important, okay, for you to have a broadly narrow brand that is all encompassing, that has some definition where the employer can look at your resume, like a headline on your resume and the headline on your LinkedIn profile and say, aha, these are the problems that this person solves. Either this is the title, if you will, title-ish, right? So for example, today I was working with somebody and he's job changing, he's career shifting. And he came from a broadcast production background, but he really wants to be an operations professional. So we drew out all of his operations skills from his background. And now today on LinkedIn, we put down that he's an operations professional. I didn't even say operations manager, because that's not quite true. He's an operations professional. And then we put some of his skill sets right there in LinkedIn, in his headline, so that if a recruiter is coming after him, they'll immediately see this is the kind of person that he is. And speaking of LinkedIn, Dave, I'm not sure if you got my private chat, but if you could go ahead and put in the chat, there's a Forbes article on the worst LinkedIn headlines that I thought you'll find interesting. The ones that are kind of too boring and generic, and the ones that actually kind of are spot on. And I think that might help you a little bit. All right, so that's mistake number one. Mistake number two, applying for jobs where you're more interested than you are qualified. And this goes right into the career changers, okay? And I know there are a lot of you out there who are in that bucket for good reason, right? You've worked 20 years and you know, you were kind of stopgap work. You were not in work that was fulfilling for you. And you're like, enough of this, right? I want to do something I love. I want to, quote, make an impact, okay? So again, going back to your passion versus their business pain, this is the trickiest part. And I know a lot of people who get kind of wrapped around the axle around this, where they're like, oh, but I'm interested. Oh, but I'll work hard. I've got transferable skills. You've ever said that, right? And the employer's like, yeah, but our job as an employer is to minimize risk. Can I say that again? Employer's job is to minimize risk when they're doing a hire. So if they look at you and they do not see, not just the transferable skills like your soft skills, oh, you're a team player, you're great with people, all that stuff, not that, but your functional skills and or your industry experience, they're not going to feel very safe. They're going to feel kind of risky, right? So it's incumbent upon you to look back at your background, kind of like what I was doing with my client today, and say, okay, what exactly are the functional skills that are transferable so I can make the business case that I can solve their business pain. So you're gonna look through your background and you're gonna say, okay, I wanna switch from profession X to profession Y. Have I ever accumulated the skills for profession Y? Either in your paid work or in your volunteer work. Don't discount your volunteer work. It's a great place to accumulate skills. And you can highlight that on your resume, but you wanna highlight it, I mean, everywhere. Meaning you want to de-emphasize the kinds of skills and the kinds of accomplishments that are unrelated to your new brand, and you want to uplift the skills that are related. But if all you're doing is applying for jobs where you feel you're interested, you've got an interest in the mission, you've got an interest in the job or whatever, and you can't make the business case, it's going to be very unlikely that the employer is going to say, why should I pick you out of the literally hundreds of other candidates who are qualified for this role? You've got to walk a mile in the hiring manager's shoes. In fact, for those of you who've ever been a hiring manager, right, I actually would like you to put in the chat. I'm not gonna be able to see it at the moment, but maybe we can look at it later, or maybe JV, you could, or Dave, you could read it. If you've ever been a hiring manager, what have you looked for? I ask you that. What have you looked for as a hiring manager in general? What are you thinking? What are you, when you're screening a resume, when you're in an interview, what is going through your mind as a hiring manager? So let's go ahead and put some of those chats in. I'll keep going, but we'll come back to that, okay? Unless JV wants to call out some. So applying for jobs where you're more interested than qualified. So make sure that you are highlighting your qualifications to minimize their business pain. Mistake number 3, along the same lines, not customizing your resume for the role. Ty actually alluded to that earlier in his testimony about getting a job. I cannot emphasize this mistake number 3 enough, because the employer, in their desire to minimize risk, and I'm going to say it over and over, okay? Because it's good. I just got to have a little routine here with you, because as you're thinking about where the hiring manager is, they have a specific job need. They have an organizational need. And when they are looking for candidates, they are vetting against those requirements. They're saying, look, we need someone who can do this and this and this. We believe that we need somebody who's qualified to do this and this and this, because we believe that that's going to minimize their learning curve. So if you just send them a generic resume, you're not actually speaking to their heartfelt pain. Your job is to go through that job announcement line for line and word for word and pull out the key phrases, the key skills that they have highlighted, particularly in the qualification section, or some people call it the requirement section. Specifically the top 3, maybe 4. So they kind of put it in order of their need, right? So bullets number 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4 in the qualifications or requirements section is going to let you know what aspects you need to highlight. And not even just there, go back up to the job announcement, same thing, under the responsibility section. Bullets 1, bullets 2, bullets 3, 4 maybe, right? And start to look at the keywords. So you're going to customize your resume, and one of the ways you're going to do that, they're going to customize what I call your career headline. So right at the top of your resume, underneath your name and all of that, you're going to have a career headline. So it's going to be, something, operations manager, government relations professional, or project manager, that kind of thing. And if you're applying for a job that uses a slightly different title, you have to say it as such. So an example in my association world, I don't know how many association people there are here, we have our own jargon. And we always talk about members or membership. So there are these membership jobs. Well, there's a difference between membership marketing and membership sales. Slight difference, okay? And I know of a client once recently who was applying for a membership marketing job, but she said in her headline, membership sales. I said, no, you got to say it like they said it, right? Speak their language, because they are going through resume after resume after resume, and you have literally 2 seconds. Okay, the average is 6 seconds, but I'm going to say 2 seconds to capture their attention. And you do that through keyword customization. So in your career headline, and I like to have a little text box underneath the headline that has keywords from the job description, and then down the page when you have your accomplishment stories, not job duties, not responsibilities, accomplishment stories. Next to every accomplishment story, it's a really good idea to label that accomplishment story with an appropriate keyword. So what happens is they see this resume and it tells a story in 2 seconds. And it's a story that hopefully is aligned with the job that you're applying for. So I'm going to press pause here. I think that there was some chat. JV, did anybody chat about the hiring manager's perspective?
Yes, ma'am. Several did. Willie Williams said full qualifications for the job. Gail said experience in the industry, trainability, and ability to adapt to change. Linda, agree with mistake number 2. I find a lot of jobs that I'm interested in, but I'm not qualified for it, so I won't waste my time applying for it. So that's not so much a hiring manager side. In interviews, I have candidates, project managers, create a mock project plan for a scenario to see how they think through planning a project, which is really good. And perhaps my favorite is our own NoPi Pierce, who said, could I get stuck for hours at an airport with this person and still want to work with them afterwards?
And you know what? Not for nothing, that can happen, especially if you're going on a business trip with somebody, right? You can spend a whole weekend with them, right? And so that's on the soft skill side for sure, but those are very important lenses for every job seeker to keep in mind. And I will tell you, it's really funny. When I have coaching clients who are hiring managers or even HR people, it really cracks me up, right? Because we suddenly forget everything we learned on that side of the hiring aisle when we become a job seeker. It really is hysterical, right? So remember what it was like when you were looking at a resume. You were trying to minimize your risk. You were looking for the qualifications, you're looking for soft skills, at least when we interview, you're looking for all these things. So you as a job seeker, it's incumbent upon you to make it as easy for the employer to say, yes, that's your job in your job search. Okay, mistake number 4, assuming that simply applying through a job board will land you the interview. And if you have been on any CNM meetings like this, or I run a Friday meeting called Hire Moment Mastermind, or any of the other job search groups, they will always talk to you about networking. And they talk to you about networking for a lot of reasons, but in this case, with mistake number 4, it is because it is very, very important whenever possible to find an internal champion. In fact, Ty was talking about that a little while ago. Part of how he got his job was Kelly made a recommendation. Okay, as a colleague of his, but he was able to do that. And so the reason for that this works so well is because, it's all about doing business with people who know you, like you, and trust you. And if all you are is a piece of paper, right, either an email or your application, comes into somebody's applicant tracking system, they don't know you. You're just a piece of paper. But when somebody recommends you, or even just refers you, even if they don't recommend you, but even if they say, hey, I'd like to make sure that, I know Ty just applied for this job, and I'd like to submit him to you for extra consideration. So your job is to find the internal champion. And how do you do that? On LinkedIn, right? So on LinkedIn, you want to go into the search bar. You want to put in the name of the organization, hit enter. You're going to go into the people tab after that. So you're going to find all the people that are in there. And by the way, if you don't see the people tab, if you just find the organization's LinkedIn page, you will see the number of employees that they have. And recently LinkedIn changed their formatting. It used to be a hyperlinked number. It's no longer, but it actually is hyperlinked. It doesn't look like it is. It's black, but it is hyperlinked. So click on the number of employees and their employee list will come up. And then you can use the all filters tab in the upper right-hand corner to narrow down by title. If you can figure out the title of the hiring manager, or even at least somebody in the department, but hopefully the hiring manager, if that person is a second level connection to you, you open that person's profile, and underneath their name, it's going to say how many mutual connections you have. Open that up. And then what do you have? at least one person, could be a bunch of people who you could then tap to say, hey, I recently applied for job X at company Y. I noticed you are connected on LinkedIn to the hiring manager, John Smith. Would you consider forwarding my application to him for extra consideration? And you would actually write that person an email, right? Don't even use the message feature from in LinkedIn, because most people, a lot of people don't check LinkedIn when they're gainfully employed. But if you send them an email, right? And how you find their email address is if the person is a first level connection to you, open up their profile, hit the contact info button, and you'll find their email address. Write them, and more times than not, they'll say, hey, happy to help. Once that hiring manager has a real live person who at least referred you, if not recommended you, your chances of getting that interview have just gone through the roof. Not to mention the fact that a lot of companies have employee referral programs, meaning that they pay employees to refer good candidates once you've started the job and you've been there for 6 months or what have you, okay? So there's every reason in the world to not simply apply to the job, but to get an internal champion. All right, number 5. Now this one is on your side of the coin, okay? The first 4 were about where the employer was coming from. This is about where you're coming from, and that is lowballing your salary expectations. I'm gonna sit here for just a minute. I think those of you who've heard me speak before, you've heard my little salary speech, but it's worth repeating because too often people will lowball themselves inadvertently. Why? Because you feel like you don't want to price yourself out of the market, right? You don't want to lose the job because you've priced yourself too high. But there is a way around this. But let me give you the concept first. And the first thing I need to let you know is that for those who don't know, there are about 38 or so states in the union as of right now that have pay equity laws, meaning that the employer is no longer allowed to ask you what your salary history was. And that's to protect historically marginalized candidates. That's great, okay? However, they're still allowed to ask you, what are you looking for? And that's where people tend to get tripped up. In fact, I have a lot of clients who'll say to me, oh, but the worst possible thing is when they ask it to me right up front and I don't know it and I just want to punt and I just want to wait until the end. No, you really want them to ask you up front, because the last thing you want is to be $30,000 off when they come with the offer, okay? You don't want to be wasting your time, hours and hours of interviewing, if you're really that far off the mark. And so, but there is a way to handle this. So understand that in this sort of business negotiation, that's all the salary negotiation is, just a business negotiation. It's very much like buying and selling a house, right? So buying and selling a house, if you've ever done that, right? So, you know, one side that wants to, pay as little as possible, and one side that wants to get as much as possible, exactly the same analogy. So when you're looking at the salary negotiation, your job, just like if you were selling the house, right? You come up with your high number, because you know you can always go a little lower, but you come up with your high number now. Not an unrealistic number, not a number that's double the salary you should be making, but a number that kind of makes sense. Is it a bit of an art and science? Absolutely, okay? I'm not gonna give you an exact way to do it other than look at the market, right? So not only what you have been making in the past, if any colleagues are willing to share with you, you can go to salary.com, glassdoor.com, your other places where you can look just to kind of see, with the industry and with the profession, kind of where are things. And you wanna come up with one number, not a range. If you ever give an employer a range, what number are they going to offer you? The lowest one, right? Just the way it goes. Negotiation 101. Because again, they're trying to make a good business decision, so they're trying to get you for as cheap as possible. That's not a bad, it's I can't fault them for that. They're trying to be good stewards of their dollars. But it is your job in light of that to try to get as much as you can. And so I'm going to give you a little formula here that some of you have heard me share before, but again, worth repeating, that you can use to negotiate a fair and equitable salary. So you want to say the following to the employer when they say, what are you looking for? You'd say, I'm seeking a total cash compensation package in the, and then I'm going to put a blank here for a second, and then range. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying here. I don't mean when I say range, I don't mean 2 numbers, but I would say like this. So let's say your happy dance, and that's what it is. Should be a happy dance number for you, a realistic happy dance number where if you go a little below that, you're fine. So let's say it's 140, okay? So I'm seeking a total cash comp package in the 140 range. Here's what's gonna happen with that. Here's how the recruiter, the employer is gonna hear that. If you say it that way, they're listening for the number, and they're listening to see whether that number aligns with the range that they have, that they're not telling you, okay? If it does, they'll say, great, and they'll move on if they hear the number. If the number that you say is higher than what they can afford, what'll happen is they'll press pause, they'll clear their throat, they'll wait about 3.2 seconds and say, actually, we can't quite go that high. We can only do 125. And by the way, that's the only time they're going to, not only, but usually that's the only time that they're going to actually tell you what the top of their range is. And then they'll say, you know, it's 125. Do you have any flexibility? That's when you go back to the statement. And you say, well, yes, I do. Actually, I'm looking for a total cash comp package in the 140 range, comp package. Can we talk about benefits, right? So that's when benefits actually come into the conversation. If your top is higher than their top, if your happy dance number is higher than their top, okay? So, but this takes a lot of thought and a lot of intention. And I realize, and again, I hear these questions all the time. Yeah, but what about, and here's one that I'm sure someone's gonna ask, well, what about on the application? What about when they have that, you know, the box and you can't say total cash compensation, da, 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 da. Look, there's no perfect like scenario here, but I would still do that happy dance number, because here's the thing, if that employer otherwise really likes what they see in your resume, your cover letter, hopefully there's an internal champion who's fighting for you, they're usually going to give you a shot. Now, if you are $50,000 off, it's not your job anyway, okay? Because most people aren't going to take a $50,000 pay cut. So that's fine. If there's a place at which it's good that they screen you out, because you wouldn't want them to waste your time. But if you're 10,000, 15,000, maybe even 20, but 10 to 15 is usually where you're going to have flexibility and they're going to have some flexibility. So if they're looking at 125 and you said 140 and you still have everything else that they want, there's a good chance they're still going to want to meet you just to see if you have the flexibility. Okay, so that's about salaries. Mistake number 6, JV and Dave, I think you're going to appreciate this one. An unprofessional or distracting Zoom background. All right. So this is obviously a COVID related kind of a concept. And I know we've had a lot of people, right, talk about this kind of thing, but again, cannot be overstated because you only have a little square to make your best impression. You just do. And so if you have a background, JV, what did you just put up there? That's cute, right? Yeah. If you have a background that's distracting, what do I mean by distracting? Your lighting is off. So for example, if you're backlit, meaning if the light is coming from behind you, it's going to make your face darker, so they can't see your face. If you have anything on your walls that's kind of busy, that can be distracting. If you have things that are from your personal life, laundry, whatever, that can be distracting, right? The clothing that you're wearing can be distracting. And on Zoom calls, you don't want to wear things that are like heavily patterned. You want to actually go with solid colors. There are all these different tips that you can use. In fact, I didn't send this to Dave, but I'm gonna, when we're done here, I have a video on my website where I partnered with a couple of other women who we were all kind of, you know, have a perspective on this. It's an hour-long video, and I'll send it to you guys. It's called Reframing Your Video Image. But there are a lot of tips. I would highly recommend that you Google it, get on YouTube, watch all the little videos, lots and lots of important things. But whatever you do, make sure that you have really, really looked at not only your background, not only your lighting, even your positioning. So do you see how where I am right now? And by the way, this is not my ideal background. This is the only place in the house I could do this call tonight. But I normally have a very different background. But do you see here that I don't have very much room above my head? This is actually what's considered the ideal amount of space. So it's not here, right? And and I'm not looking up, I'm looking right at you, and I've got a little bit of space above my head and I'm filling the frame, okay? And that's yet another tip. I mean, the tips can go on and on and on, but I just really want to encourage you, pay very close attention to how you show up on Zoom, because you want the employer to focus on you, not your background, right? You want your background almost to disappear, where it's just you and the employer, and they're only focused on what you're saying so that you can really have a really thoughtful interview, okay? That's mistake number 6. Number 7 kind of goes back to a previous mistake around the resume, not customizing your accomplishment stories for the interview. So remember, there's the customizing your accomplishment stories on your resume just to even get the job. When you're in the interview, this is a pretty important one. You see this picture I chose, this person has all these credentials, right? And so this is what often happens, is that the employer will say, okay, and they'll ask a generic question. What's your biggest accomplishment? And you're so excited to tell them what you think your biggest accomplishment is. Let's go back for a second to our general handyman. So let's say you have some project, right, in your house, and you are interviewing general handyman, okay, for this project. And you say, hey, what's your greatest accomplishment? And this gentleman launches into this whole home renovation thing that he did. I don't know, he did cabinets. But that's a completely different kind of project than what you need. But he's very proud of it. But it's not relating to your personal need. The job announcement actually tells you what the need is. Your job is to find accomplishment stories that directly relate to the job. And that could be on a lot of different levels. That can be what they're asking you to do specifically, like what their needs are. That could relate to the situation of the organization. Like where are their, what's their mission? What's going on? Is the industry being disrupted right now? Have you done research online to see where this organization is? Maybe they're in kind of financial difficulty and they need somebody to help them with whatever the situation is, business development, whatever. Is there some sort of project that they mentioned in the job announcement that you're going to be needing to tackle first? You want to make sure that you are doing a direct apples to apples match as much as you can between what you've done in the past and what they need you to do in the future. As a recruiter, I will tell you how many times I have asked candidates very pinpointed questions, and they kind of have this script of the thing that they want to tell me. It's kind of like a politician staying on message, but that doesn't tell me that they're qualified. That just tells me that they're passionate about what they accomplished, but it doesn't actually speak to the business need of the job. And so it's very hard for me to screen them in. Not to mention the fact that it shows that they're not really listening, okay? So your job is to have, in preparation for these interviews, you have a kind of like arrows in your quiver, a whole bunch, okay? You need to know which ones to pull out to hit which target. That does take some practice, there's no question about it, right? But you want to be able to even take one story and kind of twist it, right? Quarter turn to the right, quarter turn to the left, be able to talk about it fluidly so that no matter what question is asked of you, you're able to kind of pull out whatever the competency is. And one more thing about interviewing here, and I know this is not an interviewing presentation, but one of the things that employers will often do is they will engage in what's called behavioral interviewing questions, which sound like, describe a time when you, tell me about a time when you, okay? And what they're doing in those questions is they're embedding within those questions, not only the what have you done, but the who have you been? Who were you being when you were accomplishing those things? So the question is going to be, describe a time when you, used your critical thinking skills in a time of crisis, right? So what your job is to not just answer the question of your critical thinking skills when you were in a crisis, or time you failed, or team building, or all whatever they're asking, but it's to find a story where you've done a job, skill, a task, something that is related to the kind of thing you're going to do in this job. And then yes, layer it in with the competencies. Yeah, is it a little complex? It can be, but again, it takes practice. I opened up this presentation by saying you can be an expert in your job, but that doesn't mean you're an expert in job search. But just like being an expert in your job, that took practice, so does job searching, okay? It takes practice. Whether you work with a colleague, whether you work with a coach like me, whoever, here in the accountability group at CNM, or whoever you work with, make sure it's somebody who's objective in your life, who can run you through drills, right? Who can talk you through those interview stories and can ask you different questions. And you need to be able to fashion your stories. And the last thing I'll say about this, this topic is, when you are sharing your stories, you want to share them in the following formula. Now, this formula has lots of different permutations, but one of them is called SAR, situation, action, result. Some people know it as STAR, situation, task, action, result. There's PAR, problem, action, result. The one I actually like the best is CAB, like a taxi cab, challenge, action, benefit. What was the challenge the organization was facing? What were the actions that you took? And how did the organization benefit by the end of that story? Okay, so that's about a little bit about interview. Mistake number 8, typos. Here's the tricky part about typos. They proliferate in a job search. You know why? Because we human beings have this thing called an optical illusion. We could be looking at 1 + 1 and our brain sees 2. Now, we all see 3 here, but we could be writing and rewriting our resume, our LinkedIn, cover letter, thank you note, an email to an employer, any kind of correspondence. It's warm to us. That's what Rick writers say. It's a warm document to us, which means our eyes will actually autocorrect to make it look right. We actually don't even see it. So there are techniques you can use, not to mention, first of all, of course, have somebody else read it. But if you don't have a person around, read it backwards, right? Like read the line, like from one line back to the other, and read it from bottom to top, that kind of thing, just so you can catch these typos. Because I will tell you, I've been recruiting for over 25 years, and I have seen more people lose a job opportunity for one typo somewhere. Misspelling the name of the person in the cover letter, a typo in their resume. The resume and the LinkedIn experience section don't line up. They don't match, right? So you put, 2008 to 2010 on your resume, but you put 2008 to 2011 on your LinkedIn. It can happen anywhere. You've got to be so careful. And by the way, I'm going to be talking about thank you notes in just a second, but thank you notes, that's one of the easiest places for typos to happen. You know why? Because you're whipping it out really fast. You've just interviewed and you want to get that thing out within a few hours, 24 hours max, by the way. And, and it's just so easy to make a mistake. Slow down, read it really well, okay? No typos, okay? And number 9, not sending a thoughtful thank you, okay? Some people think that thank you notes are old-fashioned. Nobody does. Employers are looking for them. And because a lot of people don't do them, when you do it, you stand out. Now, the email versus the handwritten thing. So pre-COVID, I actually would have said, and I'll probably have to go back to that when we're really, kind of fully out there. But pre-COVID, I would have said, look, send an email quickly because that's expedient because they're expecting something. You could actually also double up and send a handwritten note. Okay. Or if you leave the building, you have a little thank you note card with you, you can run back up and give it to the receptionist. You can do that. Road, very not travel, but really, really thoughtful. During COVID, of course, there are a lot of people who are working from home, so they're not going to get your note likely if you send it to the office. So, but sending one is really important. Now, what do you include in your thoughtful email? Well, first of all, it should not just be a thank you. It should not just be like a 3-line kind of a thing. You open up with the thank you, pleasure to meet you, that kind of thing. You want to customize the thank you for the interview. So for every person you meet with, they deserve a thank you note. So if you interview with 5 different people in a row, 1-to-1, you get 5 different notes. Now, if those 5 people were in a panel interview, you can send 1 note. That's fine. But I would either alpha order the names in the 2-line, or if kind of title-wise, like VP goes first, director comes second, try to order it in an appropriate way. But either which way, you want to acknowledge what happened in the interview. Now, you're not writing a cover letter length, page-long note, but I typically suggest a little opener, as to, thank you for your time, that kind of thing. And I particularly appreciated your thoughtful, when you talked about XYZ, about the organization or the culture or the role, or today, I've had a lot of clients today that are related to this talk. I had a client today who was having me proofread her cover note, right? And the cover note, not cover note, a thank you note. And the thank you note was to a potential coworker. So she interviewed with a coworker. So she was thoughtful enough in the opener to talk about, hi, Kim, whoever her name was, I really appreciated your discussion of the cross collaboration that we would have between our departments. Very nice, right? Coworker, teamwork, and then talked a little bit about, I mentioned something about what they had talked about, and then actually did a nice little congratulations, because apparently this future coworker just got a certification in something. Oh, congratulations on your certificate. Nice, thoughtful little opener, nice little thoughtful paragraph and a closer, and done. But make sure to send it, no typos. Spell the name of the person correctly. All those things matter. They really, really do. And then make sure to send it out. If not within a few hours, then certainly by the next day. And this last one, and I think people here at CNM will really appreciate this, those especially who do accountability groups and all of that. And that is not to overly invest emotionally in one job opportunity. I just want to let that sink in there for a second. Okay. I have had the last decade of career coaching. I cannot tell you how many people, in fact, even as a recruiter, when I have to let down a candidate, the hardest part of my job, how many people are just devastated when they don't get the job. You got to think of your job search like a gardener, right? You're planting lots of seeds. Gardeners or farmers do not expect every seed to blossom. God does the watering, right? He'll make it grow, but not every job is yours. You might have thought this is the job of a lifetime, but you could have been dodging a bullet. You don't know what God has just spared you from, okay? You have no idea. It is your job to put lots of eggs in that basket and to keep on moving forward. Now, yes, it is a delicate balance because you don't want to have no emotion, right? Because then you have no interest in the job. You want to have a level of enthusiasm. But in terms of overly investing and saying, oh, this is my job, you don't actually know if it's your job. It could be somebody else's job, right? It could be might have a different assignment. So protecting yourself in terms of managing your emotions in this process is very, very important so that you can spring back up, right? Today, again, a lot of things happened today. Today, I got turned down for an RFP that I sent in for an executive search, okay? Now, I actually wasn't overly investing in it anyway, just because I knew I had a lot of competition, but I got a very nice note. It wasn't mine. And I'm like, okay. And guess what happened? I am not even kidding you. About a half an hour later, I got another person that says, hey, Shira, I worked with you in the past. I was your candidate. I'm now leaving my president's job. I'd like to consider you to search for my replacement. I mean, like within a half an hour, okay? That other wasn't for me. Now, I'm not saying that this one is, but it might be. And my job is to do my very best to put myself forward and to say, yes, I'm qualified, or, if I'm qualified, see if there's a fit. And if it's right, it's right. And if it's not, God has it for somebody else, okay? So that's kind of my big tip there. So those are my top 10 tips. And before we get into chat, I just want to not forget to share my contact information because I often do that. So I want to share a few things with you. My email address here, feel free to write me directly with questions that don't get answered tonight. And also I wanted to share two different community service groups that CNM has actually promoted over the last couple of years. And one is this group I mentioned, Higher Moment Mastermind. We meet every Friday morning at 9:15 a.m. Eastern. Here is the link, meetup.com/higher-moment-mastermind. It's an hour long. We open and close with speed networking. And in the middle, it's myself and several other career experts, and we answer all your job search questions, or at least as many we can shove into that half an hour. And we also have a prayer meeting at the end for those who want to stay on for that. And then at the end is, the bottom is boomerworks.org. That is a volunteer organization I founded several years ago. Our mission is to inspire and empower professionals age 50 plus to re-career into self-employment, and we offer free educational programs, boomerworks.org. Okay, so with that, I will stop sharing, and I will ask JV and David if they would like to let me know what's in the chat box.
Yes, ma'am. We got a couple of thoughts or questions for you. Can we get a copy of the script for negotiating an offer? That's one question.
A copy of the script. I've never actually written it down. I've only done it verbally, although this is being recorded. So Dave or JV, if you want to let people know how to access the recording, you can certainly do that.
Yes, ma'am. I actually sent a note out to everyone. If you will send a request to me for tonight's webcast, I'll send you a copy of it. The email address is jv@jvvenable.com, and it's in the chat window. Just scroll up a little bit and you'll see it. Let's see, the next one is, what is the best virtual background, if there is a best virtual background?
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna give it qualified, there isn't one, okay? Because the thing with virtual backgrounds is that very often, you'll show up a little blurry, like there'll be a little fuzz around your head, or if you do any hand gesticulations, your hand disappears. It's very, very tricky to have a virtual background look natural, very hard. Even with the blurred backgrounds, I mean, it's fine for something like this, but for an interview, you want the employer to feel as if they're actually with you in the room, okay? So actually having some depth and dimension behind you can be helpful. Now, that said, if you're in a situation where you just can't, modify your actual background to be something that's palatable, yeah, go with a virtual background. And if that's the case, then find one that is either looks like, like an office background. It could even be a living room, but something kind of either your home or an office, but nothing else. You don't want anything cutesy or anything like that. And again, you could go for the blur if you needed to, but again, I would go with a natural background if you can.
Unless you live in a bar, and then no.
No.
All right, here's a good question, and this might be more of a group response, but what do I do in an interview when I'm asked about how to handle a very tough student via Zoom WebEx? I have thankfully
I'm sorry, JV, go back. Saying a very tough student?
Student. So this person is obviously applying for a teaching job.
I see.
And want to know how to handle a very tough student. How do you respond to that? This person has thankfully never had that. The only other time was an 8-year-old, and the details are fuzzy. So
Okay.
I would start with the electric shock button, which is on the keyboard. You hit that and it just shocks the bejesus out of them. That's one. Well, any thoughts?
Well, look, I can't speak specifically to the student. I've never been a teacher, so I can't handle that one. But I will try to genericize it a little bit for everyone. And that is, you're going to probably be asked about a quote tough situation you've handled, a time you failed, that kind of thing. First of all, be prepared for that. Just know that that's going to happen. Someone's going to want to know, how'd you handle a difficult situation? That's one thing, just sort of being prepared. However, the other thing is this. Part of how you're going to want to answer that question has a lot to do with your philosophy about how you do your job. Okay. So whether you're an executive, whether you're a professional, whatever level you're at, you want to really be thoughtful about, how do I show up every day? What is my philosophy about how I do what I do? And it's something you might even want to put in your LinkedIn About section. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if you really start crafting almost like a mission statement of sorts, like this is my philosophy about how I do my profession, how I serve my industry. What'll happen is when you're asked about a difficult situation, you'll often be able to draw from there. So for instance, in the teacher situation, again, I'm not a teacher, but you might want to, your person would say something like, look, my teaching philosophy is, I'm making this up, right? My teaching philosophy is, I am all about not only imparting knowledge, but I want to care for the student as an individual, right? As a person. So if I have a child who's got a difficult situation, my job is to really listen, to what their challenge might be and not assume that they're just misbehaving. I don't know, teachers, did I do an okay job with that? that kind of, whatever, I don't know. But that kind of thing, right? But you start, first of all, from your philosophy. Then you go into, okay, based on that philosophy, here's how I handle the difficult situation.
That's great. And don't say anything about the electric shock thing. Don't do that one. All right, James, you've got your hand up. Come up voice, if you would.
Certainly. Having taught myself, I have not taught children, I taught adults. I was a college instructor at GMU. I have lots of experience dealing with difficult students. So that looks different depending upon the type of difficult student that you're dealing with, whether it's somebody who's just being inattentive or not performing in the way that you want, or that sometimes disruptive, or various different other things. But the thing that what I would always say is that realize that you're always going to have probably one student in the class that's probably going to have some disruptive elements. So you have to think through the potential scenarios first. Second thing is that always get to the why. I remember one student that I was working with a few years ago where he was just not turning in assignments. He just was not paying attention. That I did a little bit of probing questions, and I found out there were some other things happening in his personal life that were the cause of that. So trying to find out the why and work through that can sometimes be helpful to kind of diffuse a tense situation.
I think that's also a great answer, James. I have a question for you. In your history, and I know this is probably a strange coincidence, but were all of the people that gave you trouble, was their last name Pierce by chance? Probably not. Probably not.
Per FERPA rules, I really can't reveal that. However, I can say that having one last name in every single year, that would be pretty amazing. It's pretty.
I'm just saying, that's a coincidence. It could be. Chris, come up, boys. What's your question?
Thanks, JV. Hi, Shira. My question is in regards to mindset mistakes. Are there things that you've recognized and you've talked about as you've coached people in regards to how they show up? Overconfidence versus humility, talking too much versus talking too little. Are there things that you can tell us about, how you show up for an interview and how you show up and present your sort of true persona?
Yeah, it's a great question. So much that could be said on that. I'll try to answer it succinctly. So first of all, your mindset has a lot to do with where you are in your job search. Okay. It's a lot to do with your perceived value, your own perceived value in the market, your financial situation, how long you've been unemployed. There's so many factors that affect mindset. I know folks who will come into a job search very confident, overly confident when they're first starting out. 6 months later, a year later, things change. Okay. Now, I am not saying that, we talk about humility in the job search, right? Like I have this expression, I call it, you want to come in with confident humility, right? You want to have this balance of both. You want to be able to come in and say, look, I am qualified, capable, and interested in this role, but I have enough humility to know I'm not perfect. So the overconfidence side of things says, oh, I can do no wrong. Not that you really think that, but that's the assumption is I don't want to show any of my weaknesses or my foibles. But the not overly humble, but the almost false humility side of it says, oh, but I'm not good enough. And in fact, sorry, I don't know what it is about today. I had a lot of meetings. Today I was talking to somebody and he said this, he says, because he's a career changer. And he said, look, when I'm interviewing, he goes, I know I saw that in the job description, it says they need this qualification. I don't have it. And I said, Dan, look, if you were getting the job, like if you got the job tomorrow, wouldn't you be researching your pants off to learn about this issue so that you could actually advance mission? He says, of course. I said, do that now on the front end. In other words, you don't have to go in with an insecurity about it. You have to just go in and say, look, number one, here's what I haven't done this. Here's what I have done. But more importantly, the thing that you're asking me to do, I've actually done some research on this. And here's what I can tell you. Okay. So the point is you're humble. You're not overconfident. You're not making anything up, but you're actually taking the initiative to show the employer that you're minimizing the risk by having done the research in advance. That's just one tip. I mean, I could go on and on about mindset, but I think the confidence and humility thing is probably one of the ones that trips people up the most. So again, you want to have a nice little balance. Chris, does that help?
Yeah, just as a follow-up, do you think there is a imperative to answer questions differently now in light of a global pandemic versus how you would answer questions 2 years ago in relation to your skills, in relation to what you can do for an organization, in relation to what's happening with the sort of cultural context?
Yes and no. Yes and no. The no part of that is the job is the job is the job, right? Like look, we've all pivoted to virtual. So jobs have kept going, jobs are jobs. That said, there are obviously some differentiators. Number one, has the industry that you are the industry that the job is in, right? Has that industry been disrupted significantly because of the pandemic? In which case they're going to be looking for some sort of change leader. So you're going to want to speak to that. Number two, the whole, we're all dealing with this right now, the whole remote going back to work. What does that look like? Got a lot of people that have been home for a long time, frankly, just don't want to go back to work. And it's driving employers nuts. They don't know what to do. And so to the extent that you can be flexible about that, because most places now are at least having a partial telework policy, like a couple days a week, 3 days a week, whatever, to the extent that you are flexible and that you're not insisting that you just work remotely, that's very helpful. That would be the second thing I would say. And then I would actually just be sensitive to the fact that the culture might have been disrupted, not the industry, but the culture might have been disrupted because people have been so stressed out and burned out. In other words, your future colleagues have been experiencing this, and you may want to even ask about that in a sensitive way. When you're talking about culture, say, look, I can only imagine how much stress, employees have felt. How has that impacted culture? And how are people feeling right now? What can I do right, as a new employee to really fit in and to help alleviate stress, that kind of thing. So just be sensitive to the work from home situation and also the industry disruption potential.
Okay, another question for you. Shira, if one is granted an interview, does that mean the employer is doing a fit interview, or are they also verifying that you can do the job?
Both.
I have heard that if one is granted an interview, then they're trying to see if you are a fit.
It's both. It's both. It absolutely is fit. Don't kid yourself. Absolutely. But no, there is a qualification section too, because look, your resume only says but so much. I mean, they need to, there are certain skill sets that they're going to be likely vetting you on, whether that's technical skills, other kinds of skills, leadership skills, what have you, just to see, how do you do what you do, right? It's, again, minimizing risk, minimizing learning curve. There is that. Absolutely, fit is important, the cultural fit. And your like what I like to say is the keywords on your resume get you plus the internal champion, get you the job, get you the interview, but your soft skills are likely what's going to get you the job. Okay, so hard skills get you the interview, soft skills get you the job, more or less. But the hard skills still need to be vetted for sure, because they can't just trust, oh, you said it on your resume, therefore you know how to do it. That's why they ask you those behavioral questions, to see if you're going to align your accomplishment stories to say, have you done this? And have you done it in a way that's going to be like how we do it? But then yes, the fit piece is certainly there.
Great. Well, we don't have any more questions in the queue, but we need 2 more questions, and I don't want to have to call on people, Eva. I just don't want to have to do it. So you guys, this is the expert. She is the master here, and you have the opportunity to ask her anything you want, anything. So you can come up voice, or you can hold up your hand, or I can start drilling people. Which do you want? All right, Julie. Thank you. You just saved Ava. There you go. Gotcha.
So since no one else had a question, what do you do if you are in an interview and they ask you a question that, you have, most of us have like 10 star stories, and they ask you a question and either you haven't had that experience or you can't think of one because it wasn't one of your star stories, because it wasn't one of your more common, like, conflict with an employee, coworker, right. Or, tell me about it. There's some standard ones that they ask.
Sure.
So they ask you something and you really have no freaking idea what to say.
So
what do you do?
So first of all, you need to buy yourself some time. Okay. The brain works pretty quickly. So actually a few extra seconds can help. And one of the things you can do is say, great question. Pregnant pause. Those few extra seconds might actually jar something, number one. Number two, you can rephrase the question back to them and say, can you elaborate a little bit more on what aspects of that question you would like me to answer, right? Different ways that I could address that. Can you maybe share a little bit about, how that question relates to the role? Get the employer talking a little bit more, because A, that'll buy you more time, and B, they might actually give a little more clarity, that it suddenly sparks something that you can remember. But if none of that works, you could either say, look, that is a really great question. That I think that's going to take a little bit more thought than the time that we have today. I'd be happy to get back to you, and write you a little note when after this meeting. But I'm just not finding the perfect example for you. Or the other thing you can do, you can slightly pivot. You can say, well, you know what? Let me tell you an answer. I'm going to answer a related question. So I don't have the exact one for that, but let me tell you what I have done in this other situation. In other words, you can kind of like loosely connect the dots between what they've asked and some other story that you prepared, and maybe just sort of draw out a little thread. So those are some of the ways you can pivot.
Wow, thank you so much.
What's the best question you've ever been asked or heard of being asked from the interviewee to the interviewers? Shira, do you have one off the top of your head?
So here's the thing. I'm not going to give you a generic one, because that would, I think, be doing a disservice to the question. The best questions that I've ever heard are extraordinarily customized and strategic for the role. They actually do not come from an interview book. They don't. They show me that this person has done their homework. They are a critical thinker. They've thought about the industry. They've thought about the role. They've thought about coworkers. They've thought about resources. They've thought about the stakeholders. They've like really mapped this out in their head. And they give such a thoughtful question. It's almost it's what I call a Perry Mason question. So Perry Mason, like he would he would do backstory, and walk right up to the, to the witness, go boom, zinger question, meaning that he framed it. Okay, so a really, really great question is framed up. It goes like this: in light of your organization's in light of or given what I researched and and given the zinger question. That's very strategic and very pointed. And that employer like, whoa, you have really done your homework. What a thoughtful question. And I'll even share something else, not only about questions, okay? But you have an opportunity in these interviews, particularly if you are, closer up to a leadership or executive level. If you get permission to do this, you could do a presentation in your interview. In fact, I almost insist on it as a recruiter to have my candidates do that, where you do some sort of SWOT analysis based upon what you've learned on the organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It could be you position an idea for them. You really go out of your way to show them that you're owning the job, that you're actually onboarding yourself before you onboard yourself. And if you do it thoughtfully enough, it can win the game. In fact, I'm going to share a particular story, and I can use his name because he's allowed me to. So a couple of years ago, I placed a CEO. His name is Steve Kaminsky, and I placed him at the National Propane Gas Association. And Steve, so Propane Gas Association, as you would imagine, they asked me to find candidates who had an energy background, energy association, that kind of thing. A lot of candidates who did. And then comes Steve. And Steve had no energy background. He came from a medical society, like nothing to do with this. But from his first cover letter all the way through to the big presentation that he gave to the search committee at the end, this guy knocked it out of the park. He researched so much about this industry, you would have thought that he worked for the propane gas industry. His cover letter even had, I gave candidates a questionnaire. He put footnotes in the questionnaire. He blew everybody out of the water. His deck was like 20 slides long, and he had ideas and this and that and the 33rd thing. It was a slam dunk. I mean, just blew it out of the water. And I say that because not that you have to do that to that extent, but to the extent that you can do your research and you can bring ideas to the table. Again, it's not even just about the questions. It's also about your ideas. You want to engage in a game of table tennis with this employer. It's not just QA, QA. It's QA, 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 QA. It is, you've done your homework, you've researched that website thoroughly, you've gone on LinkedIn and maybe you've talked to other people who work there, you've looked on the internet and you found white papers and policy papers and who knows whatever else that this organization's put out, and you start connecting the dots as it relates to this job. So not only are you asking really critical thinking questions, but you're coming off with very thoughtful ideas. And you literally banter right there in the interview. So, Miss Employer, we were talking about blah, blah, blah about 10 minutes ago. Have you guys ever thought about doing X? Might you consider doing Y? Now notice I'm not saying, say that this is what I will do. No, you ask it in a confident, humble way. Have you ever, might you consider, it's non-presumptuous. You're proffering an idea just to kind of get the conversation going. So again, they get that you're committed to this, you're passionate about it, you've done your research, you're a critical thinker, you've connected the dots, and now you're even offering possible ideas in how you would onboard. Who wouldn't love that? Who wouldn't love that?
I can't think of anybody who wouldn't want it. Well, we have last call for questions. If you want to come up, boys, just push your space bar button and you can yak. I'll give you another couple of seconds. But Shira, I just want to say thank you. It's so wonderful always to see your smiling face here and hear your wisdom. And tonight you gave us a boatload. So very grateful for that. We, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have any way of actually paying or giving her anything other than our appreciation. And I'd be grateful. You can go like this in front of your video, which is a great one, and she can act like she has a little hard hearing time. and only hears me, which is great. Or you could go in and type in something really cool like, Shira, you're the bestest, this, something like that in the window. Or you can go down the bottom and pull out one of those little pumpkin images and give her a big thumbs up, something like that, or a combination of all of them. But I want to say thank you. On behalf of the entire CNM team, all of our membership, thank you so much, Shira.
Bless you. You're welcome.
God bless you. Ladies and gentlemen, that's our program for the night. I am grateful for your attendance. We had a